Hey, good afternoon, YouTube. I want to take a few minutes to talk about some of the latest developments that are going on over in Ukraine, particularly in regards to the countries, the US and Germany sending tanks, and talk about why that's just, it's kind of a bad idea. It's not going to have any effect. And here's why. And first of all, before I get into that, quick disclaimer, I'm not in the United States Army. I'm retired after 32 years, 2 wars. So I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody or anything. I'm not on one side or the other. I could care for either side. It's not my country. I don't live there. However, when money's coming out of my check and as far as taxes, they're paying for this in the hundreds of billions and all this different stuff. Well, now I do have skin in the game, even if it's unwillingly. So as a person who has been in tank battles, the two largest in the Gulf War and definitely the largest since World War II and larger than some battles in World War II as far as tank battles, and as an infantry soldier and having fought through trenches and all kinds of positions and a whole lot of gunfighting experience, I do have the knowledge and the background and the understanding to talk very expertly on what I'm getting ready to say. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not some guy out there that's just kind of coming up with an idea or something from Sri Lanka or whatever and putting it out there. I'm not someone that's, no experience in actual combat, ground combat, combined arms combat, that's just giving an opinion or some talking points or, working on one narrative or the other. And that's kind of the big problem is when I looked around YouTube, all these things that I could find, you have two extremes. You have people who are it's the most insane, ridiculous propaganda I've ever seen. Maybe it's pro-Russian. Definitely the Ukrainian side's got the most just out of this world, patently false propaganda I've ever seen. Now, people buy into this stuff because they're all emotional. They picked a team, and that's the donkey they're going to ride all the way to the touchdown zone, and they just go right along with it, and it's just insane, right? Because there's just so much lies out there. It honestly feels like they're not even fighting. They're just going back and forth, trying to spin these lies and narratives, trying to convince one side or the other of a truth that's just patently false. But anyway, back to the tanks. All right, so Ukraine started this thing out with, I don't know, like 1,000 tanks, something like that. If they burn through 1,000 T-72s, 31 Abrams ain't going to help them. We all saw videos early on in the war where Russians were abandoning, these really nice vehicles and equipment and tanks, armored vehicles, BMPs, BRDMs, whatever. So they obviously collected a lot. So if you were to believe the Ukrainian side that they kill millions of Russians a day and all this stuff, well, then they don't need those tanks. And if you believe Russia's side that they're killing millions of Ukrainians a day, then Ukraine still don't need their tanks if they're going to lose, right? So either way, regardless of which narrative you want to believe, the tanks aren't going to make a difference. But let's just assume for a moment there's no false news and the fighting is just the fighting. They're locked in against each other there in eastern Ukraine. They're going at it, and Ukraine's running out of tanks, and they want some tanks because these tanks are going to be better tanks. All right, so let's break that down. First of all, a tank is a tank is a tank is a tank. T-72s are very good tanks. They're very respectable tanks. As long as you have an electric drive turret, you have the ability to aim, engage, and load that thing and move it. It's a great tank, just like a T-80 and so forth and so on. And Abrams is a great tank as long as you have the ability to operate that thing to its maximum effectiveness, and you have an entire logistical support chain of mechanics and spare parts and JP8 to fuel that thing and to keep it going. So the Abrams tank takes a whole lot more supporting force to just have one or several than T-72s, T-80s, Russian-made tanks. So you can put all the technology in the world on the battlefield, doesn't change anything. Unless the military, the army, the unit that has that equipment is extremely competent on using it, they're utilizing it to its maximum benefit, and they're operating it in a combined arms approach, which means the tanks, infantry, artillery, and air, and any other supporting unit are all working together, synchronized in conjunction through that whole mission plan or defensive plan, whichever it is, to use that weapon system for its maximum benefit. If that's not happening, that thing is just a big old rock with a turret. No different than T-72s. You can have a battalion of T-72s. If they're being operated to their maximum capability, combined arms approach, you've got good, competent leadership, and you have decentralized action taking all the way down to the lowest fire team member, which in American military, we're not structured the same way. We're not Warsaw Pact doctrine, mostly because of how we think in America is very much on an individual basis. We understand how to work together as a team and to input those things as a team and have this coordination and have all these things kind of going on to where we can maximize, our speed, our lethality, and all those things, and bring that to bear at a single point and multiple points within a battle or a larger battle space. On Warsaw Pact doctrine, whether you're talking Ukraine or Russia, they don't have that. That's not their way of thinking. They're very siloed in their competencies. They're more shallow in their competencies. Decision-making is very centralized. For someone to do anything or action anything, they got to ask a lot of people because no one's willing to take personal responsibility or accountability. They're looking for ultimately a fall person when a decision goes bad. They're not looking at it from, well, it could go good, but if it goes bad, that's okay. We're going to keep on going. So the way their thinking is, and that doesn't get changed in a 2 or 3 week familiarization course with M1 Abrams or Leopard tanks or anything else. Again, they're good tanks. They're not bad tanks, but they're not indestructible. They're not invincible. And you can only fight them within the limits with which you can fight them. So all the laser range finders and thermal sights aren't any good if you're not employing those things correctly, and you're not employing them along with other infantry, supporting fires, air cover, whatever you've got, and again, to maximize that. And understand, so in the first Gulf War, I was there. I was in 1st Armored Division. I was at the Battle of 73 Eastings, Medina Ridge, a handful of other battles, 2 of the largest tank battles since World War II, the largest and the number 1 and the number 2, or I guess they say 73 Eastings might have been number 3, largest tank battle. But regardless, I've been in these fights. I've been in these spaces. I've seen this stuff point blank against a whole lot of T-72s against our tanks. And so the world still has this mindset from 32 years ago from the first Gulf War. And I'm not just saying this. I mean, this is true. So I just retired 2 years ago after 32 years and 2 wars. And there's still people today who think that we have in America, the military we had 32 years ago. Not even close. It's a fraction of it. To put in perspective, we had more people across the front line, right, in the first Gulf War than we have in the entire United States military today. Right, that's a fraction of what we used to have. And that's not the same military. The competency's gone. I was one of the last out of my peer group to retire. Most people retired, quite a few years before I did, and didn't wait till they got really, really old, and couldn't do it, didn't want to do it anymore. And but it was a different military, different training, different setup, and also too those T-72s that America fought against, that I fought against, that our units fought against, that we as a nation fought against in the first Gulf War. Those Iraqi tanks, they were good tanks. Those T-72s were good tanks, but they weren't electric drive turrets. They were hand cranked. Their sights were like the M60 tanks with the big giant spotlight, and it's very foggy in Iraq. If you haven't been there, it's hard to really appreciate how foggy that place can get. You can't see your hand in front of your face, definitely at night. It's not happening. So thermals and things like that gave us the advantage. In American military, we always, well, not always, but we primarily train at night. We began that back in the 80s when Reagan started rebuilding our military, and we really got into the combined arms warfare aspect and focused on the Cold War. When I came in the 80s, it was a different military when we fought the Iraqi Republican Guards in the first Gulf War. And so it made it look easy, though it wasn't. But you're talking 2 different militaries, 2 different styles of fighting, good equipment from the outside, but our ability of our tanks to fire on the move, stabilizer systems, thermal sights, so forth and so on, is what gave it the huge, huge advantage. Sorry about that. I got some kids that decided to be crazy here in the house. So, but now it's different now. This isn't the Gulf War that's going on in Ukraine. The Soviets and the Ukrainians, they all have electric drive turrets, and everything's matched up pretty equally, and all this stuff. So, they're kind of static where they're at right now. But again, Warsaw Pact doctrine, everything moves slower. Things don't move that quick. Their ability to bring combined arms, it's not there. It's not the same. So thinking that suddenly giving them American tanks or German tanks is going to create this huge change and this, suddenly, oh, they got a 3-week class with the American military. Oh, they're good now. It doesn't happen. I've trained foreign militaries. I've spent a lot of time with foreign militaries. Doesn't matter who it is. You can give them all the training and all the knowledge. You can pass off everything you know and show and explain, walk, crawl, run through how to do something, and they'll listen and they'll watch. And if they have to, they'll do it, but they'll immediately revert back to the first thing and what they know the best and what they've been trained on the most, and that's their doctrine. And so they're going to take these tanks, they're going to try to fight them a Warsaw style doctrine, because that's who Ukraine is. They're not fighting any different than the Russian army. I mean, there might be a lot of old or kind of Wild West things happening and things like that with some of their foreign legion units and stuff, or just people just kind of making it up because they're not coming to bear with any training and they're just doing the best they can. So you get a lot of kind of amateur hour, and sometimes that takes the day if you have enough speed and violence and you can bring the firepower and the weapon systems to bear at that specific space and point in your assault or in your defense to repel an invader. Then that'll work. That'll generally carry the day. But this isn't what's going to happen. These tanks are going to get chewed up, eaten up, and then everyone's going to step back and say, well, why did we send these tanks if they weren't going to work? And then they're just going to turn around and blame you for saying, well, that's what everyone wanted. So it's not going to do them any good. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to make a change. There might be like specific battlefield places where, hey, maybe that Abrams tank was able to engage a couple T-72s or T-80s or whatever and be successful. But again, if you do not have that whole combined arms support, it's not happening, Captain. And also, too, these tanks are not invincible. People have long forgotten, of course, they never paid attention anyway during the global war on terror with our tanks, particularly in Iraq. They were being taken out by, regular local terrorist outfits with BBIEDs, IEDs, 155 shells buried inside the road, shape charges, all these different things. So it's not an invincible tank. I mean, you can just go on Google and just look for M1 Abrams tanks destroyed and just see a lot of pictures that happened during GWAT, or a Leopard tank in Syria or whatever, or T-72s scattered all over Iraq in the first Gulf War. So a tank is only as good as it can be employed. It's no different than any other weapon system. It's like an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carriers are not out there by themselves. They might have a lot of firepower and air power and armament and all these things, but they're still very vulnerable. And they're usually surrounded by a battle group and cruisers and light cruisers and, destroyers or whatever, to kind of put that ring out there. They're part of a naval combined task force. There's usually submarines that are out there as well. And the most protected thing is that aircraft carrier, because even though it projects a lot of power, it's still very vulnerable. Just like a tank, it can project a lot of power if used correctly. But in and of itself, it's still a very vulnerable thing. It's just like an aircraft carrier. It's going to be the center focus of massing fires. You're going to be throwing all kinds of artillery on that thing, Sagger missiles, anti-tank missiles, whatever. So those tanks, it's a standoff range. They're not going to be able to get as close as what people think they're going to get, because the risk is too high of taking a missile, of taking, an anti-tank rocket. No different than the Javelin, schwacking out T-72s and T-80s. And so, again, the reason I'm doing this video, I haven't seen any videos like what I'm doing, people talking about this in a logical manner, talking about, hey, here's the real deal with tanks and tank fighting and warfare. I see a lot of stuff done by a bunch of folks that, I mean, I can tell just by listening to them, they have no idea. And they're just regurgitating what they heard on like Polish news or, news channel here or whatever, some talking point, because they've picked a side. Again, I haven't picked a side because I don't have a side. My side is the United States of America. I could care less for either countries. They can go pound sand. They want to kill each other. Hey, it's not a new thing. The Kiev-Russian war has been going on 1,000 years, and it's going to keep on going until this whole world's not here anymore. But anyway, gone on long enough. I wanted to keep this under 15 minutes. Looks like I'm going to be about right at that time. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll do another video, particularly talking about infantry tactics and trench warfare, fighting in trenches, positions, and why you're seeing what you're seeing. And again, that doesn't, just because it looks like a throwback to World War I, doesn't mean that, modern warfare is not continuing, because that's very much a part of modern warfare. You guys have a great day. If you like this video, give me a like. I think this will be like the first video I've ever uploaded. And so, talk to you then. Out.